Allen Hall is on a very well-earned sabbatical, writing poems and essays and short stories and probably recipes and maybe like warning signs and some anti-fascist t-shirt text probably. The sky is the limit when you're on sabbatical, and James, I must say you picked a very good semester to go on sabbatical because so far absolutely nothing whatsoever has gone wrong. Tonight, it is my honor and delight to introduce Christopher Tilghman, an award-winning writer whose novels and stories are set primarily in this very region. His work has meant a great deal to me, both professionally and personally. But before we get to that, I would like to thank my colleagues at the Lit House, our Assistant Director, Amber Talianisic, our Center Coordinator, Linda Hamrick, and our Master Printer, Mike Kaler. With James on sabbatical, they are all working very hard outside of their customary remits to make sure that our projects stay on track, and I am thankful. I would also like to ask you to please silence or turn off your cell phones to avoid that thing, that situation. You know what I'm talking about. And now our land acknowledgement. The Rose O'Neill Literary House acknowledges this region as the original resource base of the Wycomice, the Choptank, and the Nanticoke, among other tribes. We acknowledge their painful history of genocide and forced removal. We honor the indigenous peoples still connected to this land and are committed to making our community a more equitable and inclusive place to gather and learn. Tonight, the Lit House will again be donating all proceeds from the sales of the beautiful broadside that Amber designed and Mike printed to support the Nanticoke tribe in Millsboro, Delaware, where the remaining tribal members settled after being forced from this part of the Eastern Shore beginning in 1744. Specifically, our donation will be going to their college scholarship fund, which we are proud to support. Speaking of the broadside, it really is very striking. We encourage you to buy one, as well as a copy of Christopher Tilghman's latest novel and all of the other books. They have almost all of them. After the event, at the table set up by our partners in crime novels, get it? Crime novels. The Book Plate, an independent bookstore here in Chestertown that many of you know and love. Thank you, Tess. Thanks to everybody else who's been a part of that. And with that, I'd like to bring things around to our guest tonight. But first, a little more about me. I did not grow up in a literary family. We had books around, but they were mostly religious texts and gun-loading manuals. True story. I did not know until my second year of college that there was such a thing as a literary magazine. I had never heard of the Best American Short Stories anthology until 1994, when I was first trying to figure out where my incomplete little stories might find a home. And I went to the used bookstore in my town, and I found a copy of the 1990 edition, and I took it home and I read it cover to cover, and I still have it.
Oh.
Excuse me. I went and found it. It's one of the all-time great editions of that series. Everybody has their favorites, but listen to this. Just in this volume, right? Two stories by Richard Bosch. Finding Natasha by Madison Smart Bell, which is maybe the only short story ever to contain a dream that actually feels like a dream. It's splendid. The Wizard by C.S. Gottschalk. How to Talk to a Hunter by Pam Houston. Mr. Morning by Siri Husband. Car Crash While Hitchhiking by Dennis Johnson. Eisenheim the Illusionist by Stephen Milhauser. You're Ugly, too, by Lori Moore. Two Alice Munro stories. I know, but they're really good stories. Typical by Paget Powell. The Reverse Bug by Laurie Siegel. The Little Winter by Joy Williams, all in 1 year's volume. It is banger after banger, including the first story I would ever read by Christopher Tilghman, In a Father's Place, which became, by the time I found this volume, the title story of his first collection. The first story of his that I read and the beginning of a lifelong fandom. Best American Short Stories has this fun tradition where at the end they publish author's notes, something written by each author whose story got picked from the anthology, which is to say 20 stories a year out of the thousands that got published, out of the hundreds of thousands that got written. It is a substantial honor, and you get a little bit of money, and you get to write an author's note where you can say whatever you want. You can do what Paget Powell did and go on and on. You can do what Harlan Ellison did and go on and on and on and on. It's 3 pages long, the author's note, single-spaced. It is a lot. Tonight, instead of reading for the story in A Father's Place, I'm going to read you the entirety of Christopher Tilghman's author's note.
I have no idea what I cringe.
No, it's good. I'm reading it because there are two things about it that I really like. Three things. It's short. The other two things I'll talk about in a second. The first few drafts of this, there's a biographical note, and then the first few drafts of the story didn't include the girlfriend, Patty, didn't include a single scene of the final version. It was more of an interior monologue, a father brooding upon the details of his life and place, kind of deadly. Then one day, in the midst of his endless reveries, the father recalled the time his son, quote, brought a terrible, a really impossible girl home for the weekend, end quote. As soon as I wrote that line, I pulled the sheet out of the typewriter and began with a new title page. The story went quite quickly from there, proceeding toward a fairly obvious conclusion. Sometimes when you switch a story radically in midstream, all the stuff you labored so hard to create in the first version can become wonderfully dense asides or details in the second. That may be what happened here. It was. Yeah. So the two things that I like about that note, my second favorite thing about it is just how astute it is about how stories can find their form, the way a single line can break a draft open and recast it. My favorite thing is the reminder of the phrase, the time his son brought a terrible, a really impossible girl home for the weekend. I liked remembering all the tension that situation created in the story, and while the girlfriend was terrible and impossible, she was also interesting and forceful. And the father's judgment of her gave us more information about him than it did about her. That's a great trick. Tilghman's latest novel, On the Tobacco Coast, concludes the quartet begun with his previous novels, Mason's Retreat, The Right-Hand Shore, and Thomas and Beale in the Midi. Together they tell the multi-generational story of a farm on the eastern shore called Mason's Retreat. And you know what the final novel, again, On the Tobacco Coast, you know what the final novel also has? It has a son who brings home a really terrible, impossible, interesting, forceful girlfriend. There is no escaping our personal obsessions. The two young women in question are very different, and of course Tilghman has more room in a novel than he had in a short story to give the girlfriend a fully imagined life. But even so, I really appreciated that more grace is given to the girlfriend in the novel of 2024 than in the short story of 1990. In fact, she's literally given the last word. The last spoken word of the novel is hers, and that only seems fair. A few pages before that, we have a bit of high lyricism in a book that spends most of its time in other registers, doing a great number of things very well. I'll leave you to discover them on your own. The line reads, Each ripple lapping upon the shoreline is a piece of time spent. The waves carve away at the future. The coarse sand, the stones and pebbles of oxblood and ginger receive the water as if being nourished, but it is not so. They are being diminished, rearranged. The same way that all of us, too, are rearranged by time, by the things that we experience, the things we do and fail to do, which is a central concern of all of Tilghman's work, and by the books that we read. Christopher Tilghman was born and raised in Boston, but his life has revolved around Aleut, his family's farm on the eastern shore of Maryland. In addition to the 4 novels of the quartet, his other books include the novels Roads of the Heart and the short story collections In a Father's Place and The Way People Run. Tilghman graduated from Yale University, served 3 years in the Navy, has worked at a sawmill as a journalist and as a corporate copywriter. He's the former director of the creative writing program at the University of Virginia and former editor of the profoundly esteemed journal Plowshares. He's the winner of a Whiting Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the Ingram Merrill Foundation Award, among many others. Please help me welcome back to Chestertown and back to the Lit House lectern, Christopher Tilghman.
There's so many strands of what Roy said that I don't even know which. If I start pulling on one of them, I'm going to be in trouble. So I guess I won't, but there's a very intriguing thing. Well, okay, I have to pull on one of these strands. I had long relationship with a now dead, a short story writer, Andre Debus. His name was, some of you will know his work. And every Thursday night for about 10 years, I went up to his house in Haverhill, Massachusetts, where a group of other writers, we would meet with him, and we were invited with him. And so the story in A Father's Place that I described there, that experience I described, I had been working on that story fitfully, and it took place in Boston. It had, I mean, there's just nothing about it, as I said in that writer's note, that was that followed through in the final draft. So our tradition in my group with Andre was that we would read the stories aloud and people would comment on them. So I read an early draft of it aloud, and people thought, geez, you know, it's kind of dense, it's not going anywhere, I mean, where's the story, whatever. And so then 2 years go by, and I have this experience, I finally write the story. And I bring it back and I read it, and as I say, there's nothing about it, it's the same. Halfway through, Andre, genius that he was, stopped me and said, "You son of a bitch, this is that story you read 2 years ago." And this has everything really to do with, I think, what I will be trying to talk about tomorrow with the students. I've got to read some of their wonderful work, and we'll be talking in this workshop about this sense of the story at the heart. Finding stories is hard to do. The people in my many years of teaching the MFA program at University of Virginia, the people that ended in my office weeping, both male and female, old and young, the question was always, I've been working forever and I don't have a goddamn story. Ouch. Anyway, so here I am, back here. I think this was the first college I read at in my career in 1991, it turns out. There's documents about this, proof. And I would have been here as a guest of Bob Day, who was a very sweet man, very kind to me. There are other people, a woman named Mary Wood, who almost none of you know who I'm talking about, but her name must be spoken. I think my return here has everything to do with Mary's belief in me. With thanks to all. So here I am talking about these many years, and I thought I would just go back and read really the first short story that I wrote about this area. This is well before In a Father's Place that Roy was talking about. And it starts with a moment of doubt and despair in my own life, of having worked pretty hard at trying to write fiction and not really getting where I wanted to be. I was not 22 when I'm talking about this. I was 38 or something like that, or 35, I don't know, whatever it was. And I found myself at a summer writers' workshop of a kind that I have now taught in many times in many places because I believe in them as a student. And it was in Bennington, Vermont. And it can get very hot in Bennington, Vermont in August, just like here, almost as humid. There I am sitting, and I have a story due in 3 or 4 days. And I've got absolutely no idea what to write about. I'm feeling this moment as being, this could be, this is a hinge, and it was. And I'm standing here tonight because it hinged one way, but it couldn't on the other. Anyway, so I thought, well, what in God's name am I going to do? And so sometimes you writers, all of us know, sometimes you, for various reasons, in this case I've described the reason, but for various reasons you open up a vein and you just kind of let it go because you don't know anything else you can do, honestly. So I opened up a vein and said, okay, I'm going to go back to the place that is the absolute sort of bedrock of who I am. And it involved this little bit of beach on the Chester River. You know about the Chester River here, right? Anyway, So I sat down, so here I am at, Bennington College, it's midnight, I'm very nervous, and so I start to type. This is, again, this is all in a typewriter. And so I write this, and you see, of course, what Roy just read, I'm referencing my own work. In what Roy just read, you'll hear the reference to this very paragraph, if you were paying attention. The story is called On the River Shore. Here I am, Bennington College. It's 11:30 now. I'm building up the tension. Between the clay banks of the eastern shore of Maryland and the brackish waters of the Chesapeake Bay, there is a beach 1,000 miles long. The sand is fine enough, but it is sharp with oyster shells and rough with stones the color of oxblood and ginger. There's always a tangled line of seaweed running the length of the last high tide. Except for this narrow divider, the rolled farmland and mirrored water meet so seamlessly that on hazy days, the big mansions, their pecans and honey locusts like sails, seem to be making their way somewhere on the shimmer of the bay. Well, I will stop once now and go back to the meta text here. So I write that, I say, well, that's not bad. That's kind of okay. I'm at the place that matters to me. I'm 12 years old, and I'm on the beach on our farm in Maryland. The summers there, just where I said grew up. So I said, well, okay, I can maybe do this. Just keep going. On one spot of this beach along the Chester River, there is a boy sitting on the polished curve of washed-up loblolly pine. His eyes are dry now, but the dirt on his cheeks is streaked and there is salt on his lips. He's holding a crab net and an empty bushel basket, and his broad-brimmed straw hat floats in the water at his feet. Behind him, across the stand of corn beginning to brown in the early August heat, he can hear the steady hum of tractors plowing up an old hayfield. Distant on the water, he could see seine haulers waist deep on the sandbar, setting out the huge net on a necklace of yellow floats. Beyond them, the crab boats are painfully white in the sun, a flash of crystal at the water's edge. The boy's name is Cecil Mayberry. He is 12, white, and he knows something. He knows what his mother is going to make for supper, pot roast and green jello salad. He knows that the Russians have a Sputnik in the sky. But these are not the items that are just now on Cecil's mind. He's thinking about a man, a waterman, lying face down in the tidal pool 200 yards from where he sits. Cecil knows the man's name, Grayson Tommy Todman. And he knows that two .22 caliber bullets have made a mess of Tommy's head. He knows the first one entered just below the right cheek line, cutting short Tommy's last fuck you to the world. And the second one grazed through his hair before nipping it at the peak and blowing out a portion of Tommy's unlimited brain. In fact, this is going to be the first time in Cecil's life, but not the last, that he is an undisputed expert on a certain subject. He knows who shot Tommy and why. I will interrupt one last time. Say, okay, so here it's 2 in the morning, and I'm thinking that there's something there, but I have no idea who shot Tommy, and I have no idea why. And so sometimes I recommend this to the young writers in the room, sometimes throw in a challenge like that and say, okay, I guess so. So I think what happened was that I probably went to bed at that point about 2 in the morning. And I got up the next morning and wrote this story without break, probably 12 hours. And therefore I will read the rest of it without break. But I will be talking tomorrow in this workshop again about sort of the nature of stories and finding them, and we'll be offering a radically different way of thinking about stories than this one of I don't know where the hell I'm going with this thing. But there are 2 ways to write a story. So now we get into the story enough of Tilghman and Bennington, Vermont. Cecil is just now recognizing he has to tell someone what he knows. Choosing among his kith and kin, he can think of 3 people. There is his mother, her birdy face will go taut, she will reach for the hem of her cotton dress to wipe away the sweat along her hair, and then she will run to the barns to fetch his father. Or he can call his sister Rita in town at Tin Button's Jewelers, and while he waits for her to speak, the greasy barn telephone will blow hot and slippery on his ear. Lastly, he can tell Mr. Matthew McHugh up at the big house. Cecil cannot remember ever speaking directly to Mr. McHugh, but he has sat patiently in the pickup and listened to the too loud and too quick way his father answers his questions, and he has sensed his father's slowly diminishing pulse of importance as they drive away. Cecil has never been inside the big house, but he has a fort in the honeysuckle and raspberries out back. He has watched the old man tend his trees, some just the newly planted twigs of slow-growing hardwoods, dragging a red American boy wagon full of tools as he limps from spot to spot, a dead arm at his side. Considering all this, even as he wishes it isn't so, there is no real choice to make. He has no idea what Mr. McHugh will do, and that is perhaps the chief reason he believes that Mr. McHugh alone can help him. He jumps off his log into the soft water. He is wearing last year's high tops as crabbing sneakers, and stoops down to pick up his soggy hat, now fouled with jellyfish tentacles. He places it carefully into his bushel basket and picks up his crab net. From the water, he hears the slow popping of the crab boats, long and white, as they complete a pass and turn for new lines. He's frightened again, and he claws four-legged up the bank, breaking off clumps of clay that are jagged as shells. He runs down to the place where Tommy's body lies, hidden in the sharp cordgrass, and wedges his basket and net into a marker. He sets off down the tractor road that cuts through the high corn. He comes to the edge, looks across the flat pastures to the tall red silos and the baking glint of the new aluminum barns. Beyond the far line of lindens that shade the lane, he can see the rotating movement of the tractors, his father and Ray Gleason, the farm manager, working as if nothing ever happens on this neck of land. He pauses to reconsider his three choices and then cuts off the tractor road to follow one of the foul bitter ends of Earl's Cove, past a bee-filled Packard hulk nose down, a flaring fender lapping in the brine. Where the stream widens into a cove, there's a hollow locust tree, and Cecil stops to fight the most forbidden urge to pretend that he'd seen nothing, heard nothing, as he crabbed on the river shore. Cecil crawls through the last barbed wire fence and steps onto the farm land of the big house, the yellow stucco backdrop through the trees that takes over his horizon. Cecil wipes his sweaty neck. It's so hot that he feels he's rebreathing the same air over and over. The locusts are already raising a buzz that seems to set the trees on fire. He ducks behind a box bush and studies the three blue doors. He tries to imagine what's behind them. But he can only picture the inside of his own house, a narrow brown entrance hall just wide enough for a man, and a flight of stairs, an attached shed where his mother keeps chickens, a gray kitchen with oilcloth-covered table, and four mismatched chairs. As he knocks on the middle door, he wishes he had something to hold, like a basket of eggs or a bag of green tomatoes. The door opens and a large elderly woman fills the frame. It is Henrietta, as round and soft as his mother is hard and flat. She lives in a flaky blue college in Tuckertown, and he rides in the same school bus with her grandchildren on their way to separate schools. "Yes, boy," she says, and there's a milky sound to it. He says he has a message for Mr. McHugh, a message, he says, because he thinks it sounds more important, and then he bursts into tears. A shiny black arm reaches out the door and gathers him inside, and suddenly he is in a cool place. The coolness surprises him, as if he expected all houses to be stuffy with the dry lumber heat of his own. He is landed in the kitchen. It looks more like a doctor's office than a place to make supper, but it's reassuring all the same. Henrietta guides him to a chair and then comes at him with a wet dish towel, one large palm around his neck as she washes his face hard, pinching down his nose to clear his nostril, pulling his eyes wide. "Now, what's the message?" she asks. "It's for Mr. McHugh, just for him." "Is that a fact?" she answers, and leaves Cecil alone in the room. A retriever stirs from the corner, and comes over to give Cecil a sniff or two. And Cecil wonders if it can smell the dead man in his head. He sees the first bullet piercing Tommy's snarling cheek and realizes that his last expression as a living human was more like a dog's. Off in his house, he hears a clock ticking, a door shut, and a large round laugh. Then he hears the limping walk, a step and a shuffle of Mr. McHugh. A stroke, that's what his father had told him was wrong with Mr. McHugh, and Cecil wonders, a stroke of what? Mr. McHugh is standing at the door. He looks tall, but Cecil knows he isn't. It isn't so. He's wearing tan pants and a white shirt with a plaid bow tie that is running outside the collar on one side and is pointing almost straight up and down. A message for me, he says. I'm Larry Mayberry's boy, Cecil, and I got something to tell you. Hold it, boy. Slow down. Enunciate. I'm Larry Mayberry's boy, Cecil. Attaboy. And I seen something on the river shore. Haven't been there in years, he says. And Cecil imagines it's true enough. Mr. McHugh turns and waves Cecil to follow. They come out into a hallway with a wide turning staircase and a wood stove so tall that the nickel urn on top reaches the second-story landing. The floors are covered with smooth straw matting that sings as Cecil scuffs his wet sneakers, and there are pictures everywhere, climbing in sets of 4 and 6, so high that Cecil can make out at the top. All that Cecil can make out at the top is a pile of dead ducks in one and a bright red jacket in another. Cecil wonders if his father's ever seen this, or if he's ever watched Mr. McHugh turn around backwards for the 3 steps to the porch, holding the rail with his good hand. You want something to drink, he asks as he drops into a wicker chair. No. Cecil's busy wondering which of the many chairs he should sit in, or if he should sit at all. No, sir. No, sir. Attaboy. Cecil decides on a wooden chair with a straight back. He sits facing out down the sloping lawn with its terraces bordered in boxwoods towards the cattails and water elms at the edge of McHugh Creek, toward the water and the faint purple blur of Kent Island far across the river. Through the trees he can see the seine haulers who have now paid out the net and are closing the trap in a long oval around the sandbar. What do you think of trees? I don't know, sir, says Cecil. Trees are life, oxygen, the tree of life, family trees. All comes back to the soil. Cecil doesn't understand a word of this, so he says, Tommy Todman's lying dead on the river shore. He's shot dead. Who says? Says Mr. McHugh. Cecil is so startled by this question, he snaps back, I says. He tenses for Mr. McHugh to scold him, but he does not. Instead, he stares at Cecil, and Cecil looks at the way his glasses are sliding on a film of sweat until they are stopped by the splotchy bulb at the end of his nose. A minute, perhaps, has passed, and Cecil begins to wither in the silent heat. 2 .22 caliber bullets, one in the cheek and one in the head, he adds, finally. He did not plan to tell Mr. McHugh anything, except that Tommy was lying there. He did not plan to tell Mr. McHugh or anyone on God's earth that he saw the whole thing from behind a root clump of a washed-up pine tree. He did not intend to say anything further because he fears above all the next question, who did it? You saw it happen? Mr. McHugh works himself forward in his chair, and his trousers ride up to the silk skin of his calves. Behind him, the long porch with its red tile and brown ceiling studded with mud daubers' nests stretches out like a church aisle. Don't be cagey with me, son. The word son snaps over him like a rifle shot. I was crabbing on the river shore, he says, and he thinks even the locusts are suddenly silent. And then Cecil starts to cry again, the 3rd time in 3 hours. Yes, I was there. I was going crabbing on the river shore, and was just coming around the point, and I seen Tommy's boat and his trap line. He's always there. He always yells at me for spooking. And then I seen someone walking through the cornfield coming toward the shore and had a gun, and I knew this was trouble. Well, who was it? So I was coming around a washed-up pine. I hid behind a root clump, and maybe they already planned to meet, because as soon as Tommy saw him, he dropped his line and came over and waded ashore. Tommy wades ashore, and the 2 men start shouting at each other, and Cecil hears Rita's name, and then his own daddy raises his Remington and squeezes off 2 .22 longs right into Tommy's head. Everyone knows Tommy's no good, says Cecil. He steals from people. He siphons gas from other boats. He gets into fights. What happened to the boat? Asked Mr. McHugh. He's sweating so much that Cecil could see the gray, twisted chest hairs through the damp white shirt. It floated off, said Cecil. I don't know where it went. But that was right. Sooner or later, someone would find the boat. I don't want my daddy to go to jail, he says. He tells Mr. McHugh he had to come tell someone because even if the buzzards eat Tommy to clean up and no one cares or misses him ever, he knows his daddy, and sooner or later, after milking is done, today probably, he's going to walk into Officer Stapleton's office and turn himself in. Cecil is now going to say something about his mom and Mita, about their dogs, Dusty and Blackie, and their house at the end of the farm that has been his whole life and has been his mom's whole life because she was born in the back bedroom. But Mr. McHugh raises a spotted hand and shushes him short. Help me out, he says. Cecil goes to grab a bony hand and pulls him up with so little effort that he wonders why Mr. McHugh asked for help in the first place. Now, Mr. McHugh does not drop his hand before he says, now stop worrying, you sit here. Henrietta will bring you a sandwich. Cecil waits in his chair. At the very top of the tallest pecan tree, there's a slight rustle of wind that brings with it the moist smells of the cows, and he thinks of tails slimy with manure. He thinks of Tommy saying, fuck you, but it was the sharp report of the rifle that echoed under the water, far out over the sandbars of the seiners and the narrows where the watermen were digging at the rivers. In the hush, he pictures Tommy Todman stirring, hunching on all fours, wiping the gore from his head as if it were a clod of seaweed, leaning back on his haunches in front of that small pool while he rubs his temples to clear his sight. Keep away from the watermen, his father had told him, but Cecil didn't know why. Sharkey James and Mike Ferguson, their fathers were watermen. And they came to school night in their white shirts and creased green chinos just like his dad. And just like his dad, their skin was brown and scarred and flaky except for a line on their foreheads, up where the sun never reached, that was puffy and white, just like the skin under a Band-Aid or the nose of a newborn calf. He hears a car approaching, and for a moment he thinks it's Officer Stapleton. But he hears the high yelp of Ray Gleason's beagles. Henrietta opens the big door, and Cecil hears Ray and Mr. McHugh talking, and in between, the muffled beaten sound of his father's voice. He waits, and Henrietta comes out with a sandwich and a glass of milk. It is the hottest and stillest part of the day, when the sound of a lone heron shifting feet lingers in the sky. He is sharpened to it, tense for the noise in the rooms, waiting for his father's footstep. But when the door opens again, it is Mr. McHugh backing down the steps, holding a bright yellow life preserver over his arm. Mr. McHugh catches his breath for a moment, and Cecil hears Ray's truck with his bodyguard of eagles drawing back to the farm. Mr. McHugh turns to him. What we're going to do now is wrong by every standard but one. You better remember that all your life, if that's what it takes. Yes, sir, he says. It's history. History's our judge, boy. You understand? No, sir. Attaboy. Now help me put this thing on. He holds out the life jacket. Cecil fumbles a bit before he guides the limp arm through the hole and buckles the three web ties in front. Then realizes there are also two long straps that come from the back and must be looped through the legs, and he hesitates. Come on, tie me up. I'm not going to sink no matter what. So Cecil kneels directly in front of Mr. McHugh and reaches through his sides for a strap and guides along the leg and tightens it well. He does it again on the other side, this time encountering the spongy resistance of his crotch. When he is done, Mr. McHugh tries every strap and is satisfied, and he points out the screen door toward the creek. They make their way down the corridor of box bushes, and Mr. McHugh leans so hard on every other step that Cecil feels what it's like to be lame. When they come out of the narrow path through the cattails and creek grass, Cecil sees Ray and his father pacing at the end of the dock. The farm's aluminum duckboat is tied alongside, and it booms as it nudges the creosoted pilings. His father won't look him in the eye, rushing to load Mr. McHugh into the center seat. But once they have pushed off, and Ray has brought up the small outboard up to speed, Cecil feels an arm coming around him and gathering him in. Even in the breeze, Cecil can smell the sour milk and manure and the sweat of the milk farmer. Cease, his father shouts into Cecil's ear. Yes, Daddy, Cecil answers. Cease, his father says again. And they ride like this, with the water cracking against the metal hull and the long wake stretching from side to side in the creek, as if it were taking the measure of this marshy little inlet before it became lost in the bay. Cecil sees 10 cement blocks stowed in the center in front of Ray, and a green tarp, a toolbox, and a spool of new chain. As soon as he realized they were going out in the water, he knew what Mr. McHugh had decided to do with Tommy's body, out in the deep channel of a river, a mile from shore on either side. And he's so bad that it doesn't matter, he's sure it can't work. He looks at the brilliant roll of new chain bound in perfect repeating pattern of links, and still cannot believe they would throw it over the side, with or without Tommy's body attached. Cecil is worried that Ray will change his mind at the last minute, and he lowers his eyes to watch as the fresh manure and turned earth still wedged in his father's boot soles make whirls in the clear rainwater on the boat bottom. The water picks up a slight shock as they round the point in the river, swinging wide by hundreds of yards, yet still in barely 2 feet of water. The seine haulers are hard at it, too busy with a net of frothy water to notice the farmers. Cecil runs his eye up the shining line of sand, but he cannot yet see the high weeds of the duck pond or the marker he made with his net and basket. His father is fighting against the growing swell, and Mr. McHugh is holding on tight with his good hand. Do you see it? Ray yells. Cecil shouts back, not yet, halfway down maybe. Then he realizes with a jolt that his father knows where Tommy is, knows far better than he does. But Ray lets Cecil answer stand, and they push on past the 5 posts that are all Hurricane Carol left of a duck line, past a floating island of water celery and seed. There, yells his father, and he reaches a long arm out to point with a lack of shame that catches Cecil by surprise. But Cecil sees his father as at work now. Whatever the circumstances, he'll do his job. Ray slows the engine heads in, cutting all power as they glide around the root pump and come to a stop with a gentle scrape a few feet from the beach. Cecil's father, still in his newest pair of leather boots, jumps out and heads around the clump of cattails, and Cecil runs to catch up, perhaps to see if his most fervent wishes for a miracle of God or fast work of the buzzards have removed the body from this earth. But it is still there. As they approach, there is a white scattering of crabs from the half-submerged head. His father stops, makes a confused and nauseous coughing sound, but there is no help for any of it. It's bad work. And when Ray comes up, they each grab a leg and pull the body onto the sand. It's the mouth. That's what Millie Richardson's dad, who was a medic in France, said makes the dead scary. Even if their faces blowed off, he said, there's still a mouth. The mouth they spat from or ate through just minutes before they died. Fuck you was the last thing through Tommy's mouth. Cecil can see it still in those yellow teeth on a tongue that is now swollen with milk white. He sees it still on the pierced and broken side of the face and skull that the crabs have picked into long strings of skeleton skin. Then Cecil goes to the cattails and throws up, splattering a clear, powerful burst of vomit through the serrated leaves. When he recovers and looks back, his father and Ray have wrapped the tarp tight around the body, and Ray is putting his full weight against the chain as his father works to catch the tightest link around the waist with the grab hook. They do the same with the neck and feet, cutting off a good length each time with bolt cutters, working smoothly together as if they're trying to thread a control wire through the guts of a combine. Cecil has always thought of his father that way. He will for the rest of his life, ready to catch or snag or tighten something Roy's feeding to him. Never the boss, but always the first one the boss picks. Cecil has taken pride in that, but it seems wrong today for Ray to take charge. Cecil wants to hear his daddy say, "This is my problem, Ray, I'll take care of it. You go on back to the boat. Cecil and me will bring him around." They carry the body to the boat. There's no way to cover the head in, clearly a human skull, even through the tarp, sticking up over the gunnel. Mr. McHugh hasn't moved, held up maybe by the tight padding of the jacket, And though Cecil is grateful beyond reckoning for the decisions Mr. McHugh has made, he can't avoid the beginning of the belief that Mr. McHugh, in some way, caused all this to happen in the first place. Cecil pushes him off into the slight shop, and now a gentle roll is pushed by a freshened breeze. The gulls are out again, the sounds of the long white crab boats are deliberate now, a more purposeful mechanical hum in the place of the drowsy popping of the diesels. They have now passed through the midday heat that seems to make a cover for men on the bay and are entering the sharpest western sun that casts long shadows on everything that moves. Cecil looks back to see how far they've come and sees Mr. McHugh with his lower lip hanging open, the skin inside pink and wet. His father is working over the body, feeding the chains with 3 blocks and closing the loops with repair links. 2 times the soft pin falls out and is ready to crimp it with the pliers, and he swears. Then Cecil looks at Bay and the outboard and sees panic. He whips his head forward and realizes immediately that one of the crab boats is broken loose and seems to be headed toward them. Just to Queenstown, he tells himself, just going to the crab shacks. But it isn't true. The boat is up to full speed and is carving a wide arc to intercept them. Throw him over now, he wants to yell, but he knows it's still too shallow and the body, weighted down with all his chains and blocks, would be impossible to move quickly. His father looks like a mask, a frozen face with wild eyes. I think it's Avery Miller, yells Ray. And Cecil does not know if that means anything more than a wave when you pass on the road to town. Do you know him? Croaks Mr. McHugh. Ray shrugs. Cecil can see the man clearly now, standing in his deckhouse and leaning as the boat banks off course. He's in waders that make him look like 2 halves of the wrong man. He's holding a red megaphone, a long cone that explodes his face at the mouth. Yo, he yells. Ray cuts the engine. It's over now. Cecil can imagine what they look like to the watermen, so lost and out of place on the river, that they might simply have taken a wrong turn at the old elm. We're looking for Tommy Tilghman, Avery Miller yells, but all at once he drops the megaphone to his side, opens his mouth to the roundest O Cecil has ever seen, and stares in wonder. What in hell, he says. The 2 boats rise and fall 20 feet apart. And then, suddenly panicked, the waterman jumps for his air horn and gives out 6 short blasts that break into the air cleanly, petrol swooping low and fast above the swells. As the sound slowly dies, it seems as if nothing will come of it. But then, a mile away in the Narrows, there is instant response from the other boats, as nets are dropped heedlessly on the deck and engines powered to life. This isn't your concern, Miller yells Ray. Just keep away. What in hell? Miller repeats. He's pacing back and forth on his low, broad fantail. He ain't worth it to any of us. You know that as well as me, says Ray. Cecil is waiting for Mr. McHugh to explain. When he finally speaks, he says, "This isn't a simple thing, boys." But Avery Miller pays no attention to Mr. McHugh. Who did it? Ray begins to refuse to answer, but his father won't allow it. I done it, he said. For 5 years I told him to keep away from Rita, but he wouldn't stop. She can't go anywhere without him following, wouldn't listen to her saying no, didn't care. Now he's saying if Rita won't go with him, he'll, well, it ain't for you to know what, he said. 5 years is enough, so I told him to meet me on the river shore. Ray says, now you know it's true. You know what Larry says is God's truth. Tommy's got no family and no one gives a pig's ass for what happens to him. The other boat has approached close enough to cut speed, and as it breaks into a wide banking turn, Cecil sees that the driver's Morris James, Sharky's daddy, and Sharky's there alongside his father, looking scared. Morris James is holding a rifle and he yells over to the waterman, "The farmers killed him? Is that Tommy? Holy Christ!" "That's the smarter," says Avery, trying to sound sure in front of his fellow waterman, but he's still so shaken his voice breaks into a dry croak. The crazy son of a bitch went too far this time. "That's right," says Cecil to himself, "the crazy son of a bitch." And there they bob for a moment or two, the duck boat, the Mrs. Avery Miller, and the Wendy B. Honey. Far down beyond on the channel, buoy number 6 clangs dully, marking the way toward open water. The aluminum boat catches the side of the crab boat and then comes free with a jolt against the swell that makes the corpse settle slightly. Cecil is afraid his father will get seasick. "You were going to throw him in?" asked Morris James. "We were going to throw him over if that's what you mean. Why the hell not?" yells Ray. "Just keep way." Cecil feels as if voices are flying all over the river. Mr. McHugh says, "Hold it, slow down, think clearly." "You keep out of this, McHugh," says Morris. "You keep your thinking to yourself." "Grab the line and let's tow them in," says Avery, high and fevered. "What are we waiting for?" Mr. McHugh takes out a handkerchief and washes the spray from his face, and then Cecil understands he's trying to get up, locking his bad leg at the knee and wedging it against a flotation tank. It's not working. Cecil says to himself, the others simply watch as the old man struggles upright like an old cow. Finally on his feet, Mr. McHugh looks at the waterman to either side and says, "What we're doing is wrong by every standard but one. It's history." But before he can go any further, a swell builds from under Avery Miller's boat and catches the duck boat broadside and sends Mr. McHugh backward, full weight and free fall against the seat. And if it hadn't been for the high padded collar of the life jacket, his head would have hit the aluminum with nothing to slow it down but the hard knock of metal. Cecil leaps forward to help, and Mr. McHugh waves him away as he jerkily rights himself, drooling and panting on the bottom of the boat. "You shut him up, Ray," Avery Miller screams, and Cecil sees now that the waterman is losing control of himself. "By Jesus, that bastard isn't going to be the one to solve this for us." "Stop worrying about McHugh," Morris replies quickly in even tone. "Tommy's the problem here." "Ain't no one going to kill the waterman," says Avery, and Cecil knows he said what everyone is thinking. He knows Morris James or even his best friend Sharkey can't argue against what everyone on and off the water's been saying for generations. Cecil figures they're lost. His daddy's gone. The boats have drifted slightly apart now. They have long since passed the mouth of McHugh Creek, and they're moving around Hale Point towards the bay itself. "It ain't a waterman I killed," says Cecil's father, quietly. "It ain't nobody but a son of a bitch who figured my girl was his. He figured I couldn't do anything just because he was a waterman, but that's my joke on him. Because I knew he was just a son of a bitch. I'm done with him now, and I'm done with this. So pull us in if that's what you wanted to." Cecil shifts on the hard aluminum seat and drops his hand into the warm waters of the river. Finally, Morris James says, "Why buy the water when the fish are free, Avery? That's my point. How do you feel nice when you and Tommy are the only ones left at the landing? Sooner or later." "It speaks of trouble to me," says Avery, quite smart of trouble. "Since when ain't it? We've had nothing but trouble ever since Tommy's been out here." "No one kills a waterman," Avery repeats. It's the thing that makes the best sense to him. "Oh, hell, in 2 years' time he'd be pumping gas at the rate he was going, or dead. I got my boy to think about." Ray Gleason hasn't said a thing for a long time, but he's a family man who speaks from the heart. Larry's boy's here too. The boys are the issue, not us. They're over the deep, 100 feet, 200. It's enough, more than enough. "It ain't just the boys," says Morris James, "it's the water. We've got to think of what's best for the water. Who's going to follow us, Avery? Kids like Tommy Todman?" The two watermen stand staring at each other. Avery shakes his head once, and Morris gathers Sharkey into his side. From way back at Carpenter's Island, Cecil hears the big engine of the seine haulers come to life. And he wonders if the 5 men who worked so hard all day are going home looking at bins only half full of perch and rock. Farther behind, he imagines he can hear the bellows of the cows lined up with full udders while the new hen, Bobby, scratches his head, wondering if he should go looking for the others under an overturned tractor. Cecil figures it's the same at the landing when the boats are late. The water can hurt these men. None of them can swim, that's code. Just like it's code when a waterman dies, they take his boat out and sink it. And sooner or later, a half-submerged wreck finds its way nose up in the grass and weeds. "You got them chains on?" asks Morris James. Ray nods, and he doesn't even wait a second more before he begins to push the blocks over the side. Cecil's father's right alongside him, and in a flash, when they move Mr. McHugh, Cecil's forgotten all about him, never thinks about it again. To one side. They wedge 2 oars under the body and pry it up with heavy blocks doing most of the work. It catches on the gunwale for a second, but then breaks free with a clatter of chains on the aluminum and sinks down into the deep tea-colored waters of the Chesapeake Bay. The watermen stay to watch the body sink, but no one says anything more. And when it's gone, they start their engines and head for home. Sharkey turns and gives Cecil a small wave, and the 2 boys watch each other from their father's side. Cecil stares at the boats with their long sterns deep into frothy troughs, driving hard for Queenstown, the distant water tower above the crab shacks. Over the water tower behind Kent Island rises the still new lattice of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, the wonder of the world that goes clear to Annapolis. And the boats, now dark dots in the low afternoon sun, are driving for it because it marks home. And Cecil wonders what Sharkey's house looks like, what his mother is cooking right now, and if his daddy ever sings to it at night. He leans into his own father's arm, and it's not the same warm side he has slept against in the car on the way home from the pictures. Suddenly he wishes he'd waved back at Sharkey or said something to him, and he wonders if at night Sharkey ever wakes up scared. He's ever asked himself what it's for, living here on this land just barely afloat on the fragile banks of clay and sand. And almost 30 years later, after McHugh has died, and Ray is retired, and the cows are gone, and the corn land is leased out to a grain conglomerate, and after Avery Miller has died and Sharkey comes home from Vietnam changed forever, and the catch is down and the oystermen go to war with the clam diggers and the seine haulers give up for good, Cecil Mayberry brings his 3 children for a walk along the river shore. They're all in funeral clothes. And after the walk, he and Rita will pack up their mother to move in with his sister Gladys. His boy and 2 girls, who've grown up in a Baltimore suburb, run down the rocky beach toward the rounded point that is the only remaining sign of the old duck pond. Cecil watches them stop to pick up bright pieces of plastic flotsam, and the boy holds up a pink tricycle wheel with a hoop, and then they're gone, deep into cattails and cordgrass. Thank you. I will say one thing though, is as I said, I sort of made up this story. I wasn't entirely sure that writing a story about disposing of body was what I wanted to be writing, but sometimes a story makes you do it. And to do it, you'd be a fool not to do it. But not long after it was first published, in the Virginia Quarterly, I can't remember anyway, someone from around here, I don't remember, came to me and said, I know who you're talking about. And I think I said, let's just keep that. Yeah.
Any questions?
Why did you decide on ending it with that large time skip?
Oh, a fabulous question. In so many ways, it's a fabulous question. And the beginning was, I debated with my editor then, whether to do it. And he didn't like it. And I was just totally wedded to it. In the end, the author every once in a while gets his own way. When I was thinking of reading this, I have slightly edited this. I wrote this 45 years ago. If I didn't change a line or two, that would be kind of sad. But I was thinking, maybe I should redo that paragraph and say, bring it up, sort of bring the temporal zone of the story up to our present day. But no, it was right that it brings it up to 1984, whatever it is. But I think the reason that I really like it is the story that doesn't get told in between. It's really about the sense that, okay, they pulled this off. This all went on, And even as all of the things that about the culture of the 50s, as I sort of list them, fall away and no longer work, there is life. So I like that. I like the silence in between, and I think that silence is full of narrative. Thank you. That's a great question.
Any more? We good? All right.
I'll be happy to chit chat with anyone.
Yes, thank you. One more round of applause for our Thank you very much for joining us. Please stick around, have a little bit more of the food that's in the kitchen. Pick up a book, pick up a broadside, and we will see you in April for the Andrew Mosino. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
That was incredible. Thank you so